Hello, everyone. Okay, so I've just had a sudden wave of inspiration and felt as though I needed to get in front of the camera for this. So, this is going back to Game of Death, which is one of my favourite topics of discussion. Of course, we've got the project that Neon Flux Productions is working on, and that's well underway. Of course, we're supposedly getting a new teaser very soon, or a new look at what they're doing. But of course, there's always been the big question around the Game of Death, and Bruce Lee had never came up with a definitive answer to this. How's it going to end? How's it going to end? So, of course, what we know from what he shot, of course, he defeats Kareem Abdul-Jabbar on the final floor of the pagoda, well, the fifth floor of the pagoda. And then, of course, we know that there's a flight of stairs that leads to the top where the treasure, for lack of a better term, is being held. Now, obviously, in the footage, after he's defeated Jabbar, he doesn't go up. He goes to the window and shouts down. And again, while Bruce Lee wrote specific lines of dialogue in his notes, there was never a completed script. There was just Bruce's notes. But we don't know what was exchanged. We don't know what he shouted down. We don't know what was shouted back. But what we do know is he goes back down the pagoda, down the stairs, and then of course in the process he goes up to the window again and shouts down again, and then continues his descent. So it's ambiguous, of course, and there's no answer. No one knows, and there was no answer to know because Bruce never, made up his mind basically. But I've come up again. Me. I've come up with an answer. Again, one of many, eh? Yeah, me and everybody else. But I just had this sudden wave of inspiration and I wanted to talk about it. And I wanted to suggest it to Neon Flux. Again, they've got their own thing going on. They've done a lot of work and they're continuing to work hard. So they may even have it all, you know, mapped out for what they want to do, where they want to go. So who am I? But again, I just wanted to talk about this because I was really quite pleased with it, if I do say so myself. Got to massage the ego a little bit. Right. So the fact that Bruce doesn't go to the top and retrieve whatever's up there is significant, and we'll come back to that. So what we do know initially is that he does attempt. He says to Kareem, doesn't he? Why continue? Just let me pass. So, what that was, again, in my interpretation, that was just basically Bruce. He didn't want to kill anyone else. Obviously, he killed Danny Nasanto, and of course, you see that his character hated having to do it. You see that moment where the camera lingers on him. That expression of hating what he's just had to do. So, of course, he doesn't want to repeat that. So of course he says, "Let me pass." Of course, Kareem refuses. So then the fight continues, and Bruce ultimately kills him. And then you see when Bruce basically pulls himself out from underneath Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. He's exhausted, and the character's just completely done by that point. He even just staggers into the bag, just smacks it out the way, and the character's done. He just wants it. He's had enough, and of course goes and shouts down. So in this, basically, and again playing off what we've had so far before from the likes of Arrow and the Bruce Lee and God, and obviously John Little stuff. It shouts down words to the effect of "It's done." And then, of course, they shout back, "Who is that up there?" I think that's the direct line, isn't it? From, who is that? And then it shouts down, "Hai Tien." So then it'll say, basically, "Hai Tien, job's done, come on down." So then he makes his descent. And then, of course, in this, again, going on, just with him being completely done, just suddenly, he doesn't hear anyone entering the pagoda. So then he suddenly thinks, well, they can go up and collect it themselves. They're not expecting me to bring it down for them. So again, goes, punches out the other window, shouts down again, come on up. And then they shout back up, well, the boss is on his way. He'll lead the way when he gets here. Then Bruce continues down and out into the courtyard. So he's left the pagoda, and sure enough, rocks up the boss, and he's brought Nora Meow with him again. What the idea is, again, the boss, this guy, of course, he's presented in an antagonistic fashion, and he's held Nora Meow to ransom, but basically he's been true to his word. Not a mark on her. She hasn't been harmed in any way. Perfectly safe, all in one piece, and he's brought her with him. And in a lesser film, there'd be a double cross, but not here, because you know what? Sometimes the best twist is no twist at all. But here's what happens. So, the boss rocks up with his entourage. He looks at Hai Chen. It's only you survived. And then boss basically, I assumed that would be the case, and takes one look and notices, he doesn't have it with him. So basically the boss goes in and goes to the top of the pagoda and retrieves what's at the top, and he brings it back down. And in this, obviously there was no definitive answer to what was up there, but it was suggested, of course, and James Flower covers this in the Final Game of Death documentary, that they might have utilised the idea from the Silent Flute. This basically holy book of martial arts, and then when you open it, there's just a mirror with your, so you're looking back at your own reflection. The whole idea of, if you want enlightenment, you look within. You're it. So that's what they utilised. Was that in what was ultimately Circle of Iron with David Carradine? So what if we use that here? And he brings it down. And again, just a little again. This film is all about Bruce's Jeet Kune Do philosophy. So nice little touch might on the cover of the holy book. Put that on. Again, again, it might be on the nose, but I think a lot of people would really like that little touch, like little nod. So yeah, the boss brings it down. And of course, at this time, obviously, Bruce is more concerned with Nora Meow, well, who wouldn't be anyway, but he's making sure she's alright. So anyway, he exits the pagoda, and he comes over to Bruce and hands him the book. And Bruce opens it, and he sees the mirror, looking back at his reflection, obviously somewhat taken aback. What is this? And looks at Hai Chen. Hai Chen looks at the boss, and again, there was this really wonderful. Again, I cannot give enough credit to James Flower and the Final Game of Death and everyone who was involved in making that. But there's the wonderful quote in the wrap-up section where he says, "The journey is as important as the destination." Now, when, if we, again, jumping all over the place, but if we rewind earlier in the film to when the boss is given the big mission, the pitch of the mission, he says, "There's something that I want you to retrieve at the top of the pagoda. You do not know what it is, you just need to get to it. After all, the journey is," and then adding that line in there as a little nod, the journey is as important as the destination. So, yeah, Bruce is looking at the book, and he looks back at the boss, and the boss basically says that line, if you seek enlightenment, look within you. And he gives him a smile. And then Hai Chen basically says to him, "So you knew what it was?" And basically the boss just gives him a smile and a little knowing look and chuckles to himself, and he walks away with his entourage. And Nora Meow comes over and basically is looking at the book with him. They look at each other, but then the whole air changes. There's a change in the air. They sense it. They don't know what it is, but they sense something. So they look at each other and they look back up, and everybody's gone. Everybody's gone. So you had this whole entourage, and you had like the locksmith and a couple of the bosses heavies outside, watching the grounds, all gone. Also, there's no trace of the Karataka who they battled through to get through the courtyard. So they were wondering, right, what? And then as they're looking around, Nora Meow looks back. She taps Bruce on the shoulder. Bruce looks around, and the pagoda's gone as well. It's gone. So again, I'm basically comparing it. We're kind of getting into like Lisa and the Devil territory here. So one of the things that James Flower was talking about in his documentary was how, Bruce was interested in exploring like below the surface and kind of tapping into some kind of supernatural themes. So basically, this whole thing has been more of like a metaphysical journey of self discovery. So, of basically, these there's a wonderful film, Seraphim Falls, as well, which is a western with Liam Neeson and Pierce Brosnan, but that's kind of got supernatural elements to it. They meet characters along the way who they're not, or they're more than what they appear to be. Like they meet someone on the road who's kind of like an angel, for lack of a better term. And then later on, there's a wonderful cameo by Angelica Houston, and it's kind of implied that she might actually be the devil. But we've got kind of into that. So basically, yeah, for lack of a better term, Hai Chen is the chosen one. Now, obviously, what we have had from Neon Flux so far, they've done that scene earlier on that would take place early in the film with George Lazenby, who's kind of functions in this film as Hai Chen's master. And again, in their scene, again, just in terms of what could set up for this ending, to have like words to the effect that Hai Qian is the chosen one. Again, we'd never this isn't 95 Mortal Kombat, so we'd never come right out and say it, but it would kind of be words to that effect. Similar, very much similar to the scene from Enter the Dragon between him and Roy Chow. I see your skills have gone beyond the mere physical level. Kind of thing. And then even that wonderful scene that they came up with where Hai Chen announces his retirement at that big press conference, and of course George Lazenby's character's a bit taken aback. And then you have, and then I think there could be a little moment where there's a character that George Lazenby notices. We never properly see who it is, but it's the boss, the big boss. Basically, we'll call him the big boss. Why not? But again, this guy, and George Lazenby knows it. This guy, this guy isn't a human being. Basically, we're getting into that like the mythology, of like gods and demons. So he's kind of like one of the god. Again, we're getting out there. Again, this probably, I'm not trying to claim this is what Bruce Lee would have done, by the way, but we're just going with it. We're playing with house money. So he's one of the gods, for lack of a better term. So he knows Hai Chen's the chosen one, and he knows that this book is calling out to him. It wants, kind of like the One Ring, but like a more benevolent thing. Like this belongs in his possession. He's the true martial artist. So they're not happy with his decision to walk away from martial arts. So that's why they do this. Again, it's all a pretense. Nora Meow's character's never in danger, by the way. And there's one of the other things I want to point out as well. There's never any violence or threat towards Hai Tien or Nora Meow, by the way. It's all done very perfectly civilized. So the characters that are killed off along the way, like James Tien and co., they're all basically like, they're like the unworthy. And as you say, they deserve, well, like in James Chen's case, he deserves what he gets. So it's kind of like a bit Old Testament in that respect. But yeah, that's kind of what it all builds up to. And then, so essentially, this pagoda, it vanishes because it's all like metaphysical, supernatural stuff. And that's the key thing. The fact it only disappears when the book is in Hai Chen's possession. Like, it's all connected to this book, you see. And that's the thing, the fact that he doesn't go up there and get it itself, that's why the illusion continues. Well, it's not really an illusion because it's very real for him, and it is. It's kind of like the trials and, like obviously in this case, the 5 levels. Like, we're not going to outright say that this pagoda is hell, but it's kind of like a purgatory. And then it's only when he steps back out into the outside world, and then he's given this basically the Bible of martial arts. That's when it all, it's all lifted, and basically the Bible is now in the hands of the rightful owner. And then again, depending on how you want to read it, the final confrontation is Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's character the devil. Could be. Again, the shots of the eyes, they suggest something. But then, yeah, so that wraps this up, and then the final shot, them Bruce and Nora back on the plane, and you have like maybe a last shot of him, he's looking out the window watching the sunrise or the sunset, whatever time of day you want to go with, and then he looks back at the book and he's looking at the symbol, and then he just smiles to himself, and then wide shot of the plane flying off, credits. So that brings that to a close. Please feel free to share what you think. Again, in no way am I suggesting that's what Bruce Lee would have done, but obviously I know from the what James Flower's documentary, he wanted that multi-surface level or multi-level film where you could watch the surface and enjoy it just fine, but there's a lot of stuff going on beneath the surface. And again, Neon Flux, this isn't me trying to tell you what to do, of course, it's your baby. But I know you've been very great with the fans and your interaction and taking on board suggestions or giving mind to suggestions. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. But that wraps this up. Please feel free to share your thoughts. I hope you've enjoyed it. And again, please share. And Neon Flux, please, if you like it, let me know. And I can't wait for what you've got in store for us. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.